Today I'm going to explain about the trade approach by Gordon Albert. These are some points that we will talk about from introduction of trade approach, the trade dimension, the theoretical basis, personality development, and the contributions of this approach. So this is Gordon Albert. He was an American and he was quite famous in placing the fundamental concepts of the trade theory. Albert was very skeptical and critical to psychoanalysts that was quite famous in the US during the first three decades of 19th century. He was also curious that human personality is not determined by their past experiences. He was questionable why psychoanalysis busy leading the past part of human and seeing human in individual, whereas we the common human is basically lead ourselves towards the future. So that's why there is the disconnection between how we actually live our lives and how psychologists try to understand how our lives work. So basically, this is a gap or disconnection that dissatisfied all part. So then he started to generate his own theory by placing personality as a function of human survival toward their future instead of their past. So today we will talk about the concept of personality theory from trait approach proposed by Gordon Allport. Allport was one of the among uh, early figure in psychology that proposed trait approach. This approach is completely different from previous approach that you have learned previously in this course, especially the classic psychoanalysis by Freud. So, in short, trait approach believe that human personality is basically consists of several traits that are shaped by current experiences and completely separated from their prior experiences. So, people with trait approach theory are orient their theory towards perspective outlook rather than seeing personality as an outcome of a cumulative past behavior. So this is completely fundamentally different from psychoanalytic perspective. Gordon Albert served as psychologist in the US military during the war, and his work involved assessing the mental health of soldiers. During this time, Albert noticed that soldiers exhibited a wide range of behaviors and reactions in response to the same stressful situations. So, this led him to believe that personality was not just the results of external factors such as upbringing or environment, but also involved internal factors that were unique to the individual. And also, Albert observed that soldiers who exhibited certain traits such as self-confidence and emotional stability tend to cope better with the stress of war. This led him to believe that traits played a fundamental role in shaping personality. Uh, Albert experiences during the war inspired him to develop his trait approach to personality psychology, which emphasizes importance of individual differences in personality and the role of traits in shaping behavior. So that his approach differed from the prevailing psychoanalytic and behavioral approach of his time, which tend to view personality as fixed and largely determined by external factors like past experiences and etc. So overall, we can say that Albert's experiences during World War I had a significant impact on his approach to study personality, and his work helped to shift the field of personality psychology toward a more trait-focused perspective. Then we are going to mention several contributions that has made to psychology. So Alport is famous of upbringing into the mainstream psychology because it was not popular because in the US people were very focused on explaining how behavior was determined, and so instead of explaining personality, people were obsessed more on the behavior. And he also formulated a theory of personality, which is straight plays very prominent role in the theory of personality. Then he was also tried to challenge classical psychoanalysis concept on several points. Um, so the first notion that Allport made before was he did not accept the proposition that unconscious forces always dominate our personality, especially in normal mature adults, because we know that psychoanalysis place a heavy emphasis on abnormal behavior, so that this is not relevant to the majority of population, which is not the abnormal population. So he also said that unconcise perhaps important, but in a very specific population, those who has problems with their psychological conditions. So that's why unconscious process or dynamics may not apply to normal healthy adult, but it could be relevant to people who has psychological problems. Also, Albert believed that generally humans are not a prisoner of uh, our childhood conflicts, so he did not believe that our past experience could have an effect to our present lives. Albert put a very high emphasis on the notion that we are more guided by our present and our outlook towards the future instead of our past experience. So it's very clear that he was very different from the classic psychoanalysis. And also, instead of trying to explain a human personality from the view of abnormal people, why not asking the actual healthy people and investigate about their personality? Uh, Freud, yeah, saw a continuum between normal and abnormal behavior, but the difference compared to Freud, Albert said that it's a very clear distinction between abnormal and normal people. So there is no continuum about both. So that's why in this theory, Albert spent a lot of time to explain what it's like to be mature and healthy personality. And for Albert, the abnormal personality is actually functioning infantile level, so it would never reach the mature level of human normal personality. So that's why it's clear distinction between normal and the abnormal ones. The next would be he put emphasis on the uniqueness of personality. So he would say that every human would have different traits or different combination of traits. So that makes every person has a unique combination of several traits. Uh, that's why Allport oppose the idea of general theory of personality, and also he opposed the idea that there is a general construct or general law that a theory of personality can apply to every human in this earth. So that's why he argued that it's our personality is not general or universal. So there is no global theory of personality. Instead, it could be very specific aspects to the individual itself. So we might have different combinations of traits that makes us unique as a person. Then there are some views that actually very important in psychology. So Alpert saw personality as a dynamic organization within the individual. So even though it's still a dynamic system, but it could be unique within individual that could determine our behavior and cognition. And the term of personality dynamic in Alport means even though personality could be changed or growth, yeah, but it's organized in an organized form. It's not random growth. So we can say that even though personality is dynamic or constantly changing over time, but the change is organized. The other view, yeah, Albert viewed that human mind and body as a unit, so it's not separate identity, uh, namely psychophysical. Personality is composed of both and body, both mind and body, functioning together as a unit. So basically, it's a comprehensive unit, not solely mental or biological function, but it's more like a unity of our organisms. It's very different from the previous view that views mind and body as a separate entity, whereas mind has a more complex dynamics compared to the body. And also, what Alport meant about the determinant here is that our personality could activate and also directing our specific behavior, and so that's why our personality is an abstract entity that activate and direct our behavior. And the combinations of our traits could be lead to specific behaviors and often specific uh, behaviors in which within each individual. And the way we think and behave could be very typical to every one of us. So that makes our behavior completely different from the rest of us. Um, okay, and also our personality reflects both our heredity and our environment. So it's a combination between heredity and environmental influences that would be very different as well from the previous approach that sees personality solely uh, hereditary or solely environmental influences, and in a way that heredity could provide the raw material, the psychological functions, and also the intellect, temperament as well. And it could be shaped and changed, or it could be expanded by the condition in our environment. So that's why Alport believe that both personal and situational are important in determining our personality. So there is no single factor or just one factor that has heavy influence in shaping the personality. I'm going to explain the concept of traits that is very central to this theory, which is one of the most important theory in psychology then would be developed into a more sophisticated form. So, Alport's trait approach to personality psychology emphasized the importance of traits in shaping behavior and personality. Traits are different from other aspects of personality, such as states and types in our conditions. So we can say that traits are enduring, traits are stable, and enduring patterns of behavior, thought, and emotion that are relatively consistent across different situations and over time. In contrast, states or other conditions are temporary and changing aspects of our personality that are influenced by situational factors. And traits are also dispositional. Traits are uh, uh, inherent to an individual and are relatively consistent across different situations. In contrast, types are categorized that individuals can place into based on specific characteristics or behaviors. And traits are continuous. Yeah, traits are a continuous dimensions of personality that vary in degree or intensity rather than being dichotomous categories. In contrast, types are often viewed as distinct categories that individuals either do or do not belong to. Based on Alport theory, yeah, he believed that traits were the most fundamental units of personality and that they played a central role in shaping behavior and personality. While other aspects of our personality, such as states and types, are also important, Albert believed that they were less fundamental and less enduring than traits. So, by focusing on traits, Alpert provided a framework for understanding the underlying structure of personality and how it can influence behavior in a wide range of situations. And then also trait determine or cause behavior and empirically existence. We can infer the existence of traits in the consistency of persons' responses to the same or similar stimuli by observing his or her behavior over time. And traits also vary with situation. For example, one person display his or her trait of neatness in one situations and the trait of disorderliness in another situation. So we can know his or her traits by look at the behavior in different situations. So it's have variations of responses. So I'm going to explain you what Albert mean with personality traits and how it formed as a concept of personality. So basically, personality traits sometimes it could be interrelated uh, to one another. So they may overlap, but sometimes they could represent very different characteristics. So, for example, taking aggressiveness and hostility, we say that people could be aggressive and hostile at the same time, but aggressiveness and hostility is a completely two different things. So they completely two different traits. So even though it's related and sometimes it occurs at the same time, those traits are completely different. But of course, it frequently says that we often observe that those two traits could appear together, but they are the two different things. The next about two types of general traits by Albert. The first one will be the individual traits, and the second one would be the common traits. So the individual traits would be very unique in particular to a person. So it was like a federal expressions of our personality. While common traits is that trait that we share with other people as an identity, shared identity, a group identity to a certain attitudes as same members of a cultural group. So common trait is like a stereotype of a group. And for example, if you see a Japanese that are not being assertive, but they're being very permissive to others people requests, it's very typical. Yeah, for example, it's very typical to a Japanese, and we could say that the common traits of the Japanese is that being permissive. So, common traits are highly influenced by a social, environmental, and cultural influences because we share these traits with other people who are the same member of a cultural group as we are. Um, and Albert also use personal disposition to describe personal or individual tribe traits, and it makes it so that people would not confuse the individual and also the collective part of our personality. And this personality's disposition could be varied, depends on the intensity and its significance. So that's why Allport divided personal disposition into three different traits. According to Allport, they could be cardinal, central, and secondary traits.